So, last year, this happened.
My roots. I can't feel my roots.
I had to go to the dentist, and that was expensive. So for the month of October, I did a bunch of fundraising stuff here, and you guys really pulled through and made it happen. And you all have my eternal gratitude. My teeth got fixed up and everything. And ever since then, I've been trying to think of something to do to actually really say thank you. I had a stream shortly after, and I threw out a few suggestions, and one thing that everyone decided was the most fitting was making an LS Mark style every episode reviewed of Glenn Martin DDS. If you don't know what Glenn Martin, Doctor of Dental Surgery, is, you're not alone. I am probably the only person on Earth who even remembers it. It was a cartoon that aired on Nickelodeon back in 2009, and one of the few cartoons that's actually in stop motion, like Moral Oral. Glenn Martin is also not very good. It was the passion project of Michael Eisner. He put up his own money to make this thing a reality. And what resulted was the most bog-standard, cliched sitcom setup in animation history, and Comedy Central has been trying to fill that void ever since the show was canceled. We got the idiot dad, the uptight mom, the idiot son, and the uptight daughter. The only real difference here is that Glenn Martin burned down his house because herdy-dur-dur, that's our father, he's an idiot. And so the family goes on a tour all throughout the United States. It'd be a really creative original twist if Ben 10 didn't beat them to the punch by half a decade. Honestly, I thought this was going to be one of the blandest things that I've ever seen in my life, and that was a part of the joke of why I wanted to do this, because it's Glenn Martin. Even though you're watching this video, you do not care about Glenn Martin DDS. Then I started to look through the episode synopses on Wikipedia. The show has 2 seasons, 40 episode, once again, pretty standard. But then I saw this. Guest stars Betty White and MC Hammer in 2010. Billy Idol, Elijah Wood, Jimmy Kimmel. So, Fergie, Rob Riggle, DJ Qualls, and Patton Oswalt all walk into a recording studio together. Then I noticed this episode premise. Season 2, Episode 6, Fashion Show. On a trip to New York, Glenn drives the RV into the Hudson River, and Connor becomes a male model. The girls steal Donald Trump's wig, only to discover that it is evil. What am I even looking at? If you know anything at all about this show, it's probably its controversy. Yeah, this show actually had a controversy. And not because of the Donald Trump thing. You see, Glenn Martin DDS was made for older audiences. It's a Nick at Night original. But for a Nick at Night original, it actually aired pretty early into the night, as in it would start off the block. So kids would be watching SpongeBob, and then right after that, they got the show about the dog with the giant anus. And I thought that said dog's giant anus was the only thing that I'd ever remember about Glenn Martin. But today we're going to get to see if there's actually more to this show. Maybe it's actually a hidden gem 5 episodes in. Who knows? This is why we always look thoroughly through a show before judging it. The episodes were aired out of order because I don't know, but the best way to watch Glenn Martin DDS is via production order. And that's what we're going to do here, and the reason why will become apparent quite quickly. This is the episode that I actually reviewed back in 2015. It was my grand debut returning to the platform after my YouTube channel was temporarily terminated for copyright infringement. So, let's find out why. This episode, that explains the plot of the show, was the 3rd one aired for no reason. Glenn Martin thinks that his family is falling apart and sees an old park is being destroyed, so he rallies up everyone in a broken down RV in a cross-the-nation field trip. I'll start with the animation because it'll be distracting if I don't. As I mentioned, Glenn Martin is one of the few cartoons that is fully stop motion, which is definitely unique and admirable in a sense. The only other ones that I can think of off the top of my head are Moral Oral and Robot Chicken, and that alone does make the show stand out in a certain way. The problem is that the puppets aren't very good. They have very bad designs. Glenn himself is simultaneously as generic as possible and uncanny as possible. Characters on the show literally says he has a head straight out of Easter Island. Whenever someone is forced to emote, it just looks wrong All of their hands are ginormous for no reason, and the close-ups when any of the characters are talking almost look like Synchrovox. It's nowhere near the ugliest thing that I've ever seen, and you can get used to it, but it is almost never not a distraction. Got a lot of that dead-eye look, and it just makes some of the jokes not work, because they don't really play to the medium of stop motion. So, with that aside, how's Save the Tooth, the first episode of Glenn Martin DDS in production? I regret every single decision that I have ever made in my entire life. Alright, I'll try to be fair here. This is impressive. It is the stop motion show that has the most gross out in the first episode possible. If you do remember anything at all from the show itself, it's that the dog has a giant anus. And Michael Eisner must have really liked that joke, because we see the dog's giant anus again and again and again. Behold, Eisner's greatest dream. Glenn Martin is an idiot. That's his entire character from beginning to end, because he is a father, and this is a sitcom. He tries to fix a tire with dental cement. He also teaches his son to peep on his naked neighbor, and then confuses the sounds that Connor makes for a conversation about some stupid park. Also, Glenn Martin suggests that he wants to schedule sex with his wife through some underage girl that he doesn't know.
Glenn Martin, DDS.
Let me see. Sorry, not notarized.
Is this notarized?
I'm also a notary public.
Oh, I might have some paperwork for you.
It wasn't funny in 2015 when I reviewed it, it wasn't funny in 2025 when I'm reviewing it now, and it wasn't funny in 2010 when this originally aired. Glenn's wife Jackie is,
You know how I feel about postmarital sex?
a standard sitcom wife from the era. If you don't remember, this is how literally every single sitcom worked. Literally every single married couple was a sex-crazed, aromantic man married to an asexual woman with no libido. And that was the entire joke. As for Connor, he is Chris Griffin, and I will be calling him Chris Griffin for the remainder of this video. The only character who is remotely interesting is Courtney because she has a gimmick. She treats everything like a business, which isn't the most original idea either, but you know, it's something. There's also her assistant Wendy. She exists. Every single joke of this episode that's not gross out is very typical standard sitcom. That's not funny and has been done to death from here to Kingdom Come. The only thing that I think came close to being funny was this one joke here.
Did you remember to put your bike away?
This bike is fine, Jackie.
And then later the bike gets stolen. I'll give him credit for that one. But yeah, otherwise this episode sucks out loud. As the first episode, it's obviously on the bottom of the list, and here's to hoping that it stays the worst episode, because we have 39 more of these train wrecks to go. Who knows though? This show might actually get good. It could happen. No, I am not still high on laughing gas, thank you. Oh hey! This episode is even worse. This is actually the episode that they decided to air first. This is their best foot forward. To be as fair as I can, some of the jokes are more well-constructed. They tone down the dog's ass, but this episode's failings are far worse. So, once again, this is a very cliched plot. One of the parents is super annoyed that his family is being too obsessed by technology. Very late 2000s. And because this is a road trip, we gotta go to Amish country. And through this, we get every single Amish type joke in history. It's like Weird Al's Amish Paradise, except not good. The Amish don't use technology. Dolls without faces, cameras steal the soul. It goes without saying that it's very inaccurate to what the Amish people are actually like. You know, it's just the stereotype of it. And you know, I wouldn't be too down on that. It's like, you know, Family Guy. This shit is common. It's what they do. But one subplot about this episode is Chris Griffin here learning that as he is a 13-year-old, he is an adult in Amish culture. He meets a 16-year-old that is commonly described as a spinster and tries to get married to her. Never mind not being accurate, it's not funny and just kind of wrong. I wouldn't say the episode gets strictly uncomfortable, except during Amish dentistry. That part kind of made me cringe really hard. Also, they had to pick their keys out of canine shit. Glenn falls in manure at one point. Okay, yeah, there's a lot of things that are uncomfortable about this episode. But I think the problem here is that absolutely no one is remotely likable. No one has any sort of charisma or actually any reasonable point, and it just gets very slow and tedious, ironically, quite quickly. And I have just nothing more to say about this one. Episode 3, Pimp My RV. It was about this time that I realized that this was actually one of those shows where every single episode is worse than the last, and I have made a terrible mistake. In this episode, the Martins want to redesign their RV. They come across a hitchhiker. The joke is that he is every single gay stereotype of 2009.
Glenn, if you're gonna grow as a person, you have to let go of material things, especially when that material is a 60-40 poly rayon blend.
Every single one. And that is every single joke in this entire episode. But the punchline is that he actually isn't gay after all. And he redesigns their RV to be a house, meaning that there is no longer anything unique about the premise in any way whatsoever. Yeah, this episode can die in a fire. In this episode, the family gets a new GPS system. This causes Glenn Martin to have an emotional affair with it. Honestly, this is probably the best episode so far, or at least the least bad. This is a premise that I've seen before, most notably a Treehouse of Horror short, but this show has already presented me with far worse than just being cliché. The voice actress of the GPS is Wendy Malick. She's fine, but it was a little distracting because she's also the voice of Pasha's wife in The Emperor's New Groove, and I had watched that movie 3 days before watching this episode, so that is literally all I could think of. Pacha's wife flirting with Glenn Martin, DDS. The episode's not really funny or anything, but I will say that the climax of the episode is actually kinda alright. An armadillo comes and eats Glenn's face. Also, the GPS woman was apparently a real woman the whole time, somehow, and tries to kill Jackie. Also, there's a subplot where Chris Griffin and his sister try to run for class president of their home school, and it ends with them throwing a Spanish book at the aforementioned GPS woman. That was pretty cool. We get to see Abraham Lincoln get shot in the head. It's a nice reprieve from the men can't take direction jokes and the women don't listen to men's problem jokes. Look, I'm really trying to find something to keep me engaged here. The show is already frying my brains 4 episodes in, and I haven't even gotten to the stupid MC Hammer episode yet. Oh my god. Oh my god. This episode actually isn't terrible. I'm actually impressed. The episode's not great, but it is actually watchable, which is a first for this show. Night of the Living Dentist is the Halloween episode, and that actually plays to the premise of the show. Glenn Martin is a dentist, so he'd obviously have opinions on this holiday. I'm not going to say it's the most creative thing in the world, the dentist not liking Halloween, but we don't usually get this trope from the dentist's perspective. So, in dental school, Glenn was scared straight out of sugar. And in this episode, he gets reintroduced to it and gets totally addicted. And the episode is actually kind of funny at points. At the very least, it's interesting. And eventually, Glenn goes crazy and ends up looking like a werewolf and driving the entire trailer park insane. The episode actually managed to keep my attention. There's also a subplot where Wendy and Connor start dating, I guess, and it's whatever. There's a gross bit where Wendy is kissing Connor's retainer, but it's less gross than the show has been, thank God. Otherwise, this episode is actually a 7 out of 10, which feels like I'm watching BoJack Horseman after the previous 4 episodes. Also, the giant anus dog licks off all of the chocolate off of Glenn's face that made him look like a werewolf, so he's probably going to be dead by the next episode. So this one is just nothing but bonuses. Oh no, the dog didn't die. That's just fantastic. Anyway, this episode is garbage. It is just plain not funny. Glenn goes back to his and Jackie's college, and we have to have every single college cliche possible. Trying to suck up to the star quarterback who is still stuck in the past. 2 cliches for the price of 1. Also, there's a subplot where Jackie's sorority has been converted into a nursing home. Old people gross out jokes ensue. And that's the episode, until Glenn beats up the rival mascot and everyone turns on him because it turns out under that costume, she's a girl. Yeah, this episode can go die on a hill. It's amazing. When this show finally starts doing something new and unique, it can't help but ruin it by being unashamedly Glenn Martin DDS. In this episode, we learned that Wendy is actually from North Korea, and she was a gymnast and escaped to America. And of course, the North Koreans want her back. And then it's a competition between them and Courtney, who treats her like an employee instead of a friend. This is the best premise for an episode yet. It's really hard to fuck up. You've actually picked something really engaging here. What kills it are the terrible fucking jokes. One of them, there's a subplot, running gag thing where Chris Griffin wants a piercing, so he pierces his own ear. And then we get to see the blood, and for the rest of the episode, his ear is swollen and ugly. There's also this running gag where the North Korean gymnast coach person got his arm blown off and had to replace it with a baby arm that is treated like a baby. It is very, 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 very not funny. And that joke alone drops this episode by several points. Never do something like that again. Glenn Martin, I hope this is a learning experience for you. The less Glenn Martin you are, the better you are. So, everything about this episode is ass. This is probably one of the most miserable viewing experiences I've had since watching The Problem Solvers last year. Chris Griffin is upset that he can't win anything, so the Martins go to the circus, where Chris here tries to find an act that suits him. At first, it's cleaning elephant crap, then he gets his head stuck in an elephant's ass, which is something that we see happen repeatedly throughout the entire episode. This results in many other characters barfing. It is not fun or funny in the slightest. And if that's not bad enough, there's a subplot where Glenn Martin's wife accidentally starts taking testosterone. Have you ever seen the Simpsons episode where Marge does the exact same thing because the show has literally no originality? Well, it's basically the exact same thing, including Jackie becoming hypersexual. And the episode ends with her getting confused for a man and then using a urinal. This episode goes to the bottom of the list, and may God have mercy on all of our souls if it's not stuck there for the rest of this, experiment. The one thing about Glenn Martin that actually has been impressive is how so many episodes so far have all managed to be bad, but in completely different ways. The last one was all about stupid gross-out humor. This one is all about gay jokes. So Glenn and his family go to an eco-village because this is an environmental episode, and whoever made this really does not like environmentalism. At the eco-village, both Jackie and Glenn fall in love with the eco-leader guy. Like, explicitly and literally. In the show, it's stated to be a quote-unquote bromance, which is stated to be two guys, getting along just short of being gay. And for the rest of the episode, the two of them act like they're in a relationship, which the show pretends is funny. I guess there's one joke that actually works towards the beginning. A bunch of people are shouting "Planet Killer" when Jackie pisses off the eco people, but the Martins end up driving away and it's revealed that the Planet Killer is actually a band. But a lot of these jokes are very early 2010s. Courtney's subplot is that she needs to learn to admit that she sometimes wets the bed. And Chris Griffin becomes Two-Face because a hallucinatory eagle gets him to sleep on a cell phone tower. But it's okay because he gets to stare at boobs at the end. You could have set the money on fire that was used to make this episode, and the smoke would be more entertaining. So, this episode has only one singular joke. One joke all the way throughout the entirety of its main plot. You know, old people, what if old people did sex things? That's it. That's the beginning, middle, and end of this episode. Again, and again, and again. Glenn takes a trip to Florida to see his mother, who is played by guest star Betty White. Glenn Martin learns that she's a swinger, and the episode goes all downhill from there. It's pretty typical bad adult sitcom in that it's just gross for the sake of being gross. The episode wants to do the South Park clone thing where it tries to be shocking at the expense of all else, and it can't really for two reasons. One, it's stop motion, and there's only so demented you can really get with stop motion, unless you're playing with dark concepts like moral oral. And two, this all happened like 15 years ago, and shows have so far pushed the envelope past this since then, that whatever this episode is trying to do gets passé real quick. The episode also does have two subplots, which is ambitious if nothing else, but the cost of that is that the two of them have nothing going for them and they don't really resolve. Courtney and Wendy decapitate a lawn flamingo because Florida, and this Russian guy tries to force a confession out of them. It has 3 scenes in the episode and no ending. Chris Griffin finds an alligator egg because Florida. It hatches and he has a baby alligator for the episode, and then he returns it and the baby alligator gets eaten. This episode is just annoying and I hate it. And the more and more of Glenn Martin DDS I watch, the more and more I realize how big of a mistake this whole thing really was. And the less and less I understand why anyone would put up their money to fund just a stock adult sitcom, like making it stop motion would suddenly make it original and new and interesting. When Glenn Martin DDS can't even beat The Simpsons going to Florida, and one of The Simpsons' worst outings in history.
Now, let's blow out of this city that Donald Trump forgot.
Speaking of The Simpsons, we've got a Mobster episode this time. I know. Simpsons Did It is never a real criticism, since that show's had a billion episodes, plus 2. But this episode's biggest problem is that it relies heavily on mob jokes that you've seen time and time again, not just on The Simpsons. Glenn comes across a mob business, they help Glenn Martin out by doing mob things, and Glenn, being the moron sitcom father he is never the wiser. Also, we get a bonus cliche. It's the anniversary, but there's another obligation that Glenn Martin is conflicted with. I will give the show credit in this one little thing. At the very least, Glenn Martin didn't forget the anniversary. That is probably the biggest sitcom cliche in history. God have mercy on anyone who decides to use that thinking it's original or interesting or new. I'll also give this episode credit in a new area. There's nothing horrendously cringeworthy in it, which, considering the last few episodes, that's a major improvement. The dog does fall in love with a fox skin, but that subplot never goes anywhere. Also, Chris Griffin dresses up as a girl for female boxing, but that also never really goes anywhere. Each of these subplots barely exists, and I have no idea why Glenn Martin has them at all if it really can't commit. I guess the subplots try to provide lighthearted levity, but they're so barely there that they don't really do anything but burn time. Chris Griffin fights a kangaroo, and maybe if this was The Simpsons, that would have actually been funny, because here's the thing. Stop motion is slower and generally more stilted than traditional animation, which means that the slapstick doesn't really work. It's ironic. Glenn Martin's one point of intrigue that it's a stop motion cartoon is actually a detriment. The expressions can't go as wild, the slapstick doesn't hurt as much, and the movement just isn't there for something ridiculous like this to work properly. It has the same effect of a kid slamming a kangaroo action figure and a Barbie doll together, saying that they're fighting. But I'll give the episode this. I've seen worse. You ever see a Christmas special that forgets it's a Christmas special? Like, for the first 30 seconds, this episode is all Christmas, the family is doing a shopping spree, and then Christmas is on the back burner until the last 30 seconds of the episode when a boy band member is singing about Christmas. Honestly though, I'm semi-impressed with this episode overall. Glenn Martin beat someone else to an idea for once. I guess Gravity Falls wasn't the first show to treat boy bands like they were literally genetically engineered. So, the main plot of this episode is that Glenn can't buy a churro, so he forces his entire family to get jobs in the Mall of America. I'm sorry, it's actually this. I don't get the joke here. Literally in every other episode so far, the family is seeing real landmarks and visiting real places. I really just don't get the show's logic or its sense of humor. Maybe whoever wrote this was engineered in one of those tubes and doesn't understand humans. And I mean that in every sense of this episode. Like, the episode is about the Martins each getting a job for the week that they're staying there. That's not how jobs work. You can't do this premise when your family is traveling around the country. It doesn't work that way. Also, Chris Griffin, the oldest here, is 13. The two girls are younger than that. Generally, people don't hire 13-year-olds. Even back in 2010, Glenn is annoyed that his wife doesn't work, so he makes her get a job, and she fails at doing the job. Then she starts using sex to sell knickknacks, and because Glenn is working next door, he either gets jealous or something, and says that it's a sexually hostile work environment and gets her fired. Why is Glenn working at the mall? He already has a job.
That's me.
Glenn Martin, father, dentist,
It's like whoever wrote this episode doesn't understand the deep and intricate lore of Glenn Martin DDS.
Dentist.
It's in the name! The man is a dentist! Also, Chris Griffin is a mall cop in a subplot that goes nowhere. The mall cops want to steal nickels from a fountain and threaten to tell on Chris for stealing a pretzel. He breaks away and does the job and tackles his mother. And this subplot is never resolved. The other mall cops are never caught. The girls try to stop this evil businessman from exploiting the boy band clones, but then one of the boy band clones gets hit by a car, and the evil producer man wins in the end. The bad guys win in both subplots, and it's not like they tell a joke about it or anything. It's like they legitimately forgot to finish the story. Or they just ran out of time.
Dentist.
Like, in one sense, it is admirable that they want to give everyone something to do in every episode, but if you can't resolve each and every plot, it makes all of the episodes feel very half-assed. Also, this episode and many others have 2 titles for no reason, like they're SpongeBob specials. I don't get that either.
And I burned the house down, and I burned the house down, and I burned the house down.
From downtown humiliation.
I have to admit, he is adorable.
Heaven is missing a pot-bellied angel.
They like to write a lot of gay jokes about Glenn, don't they? This episode is about everyone being awful. Very typical mediocre adult animated sitcom plot, I must say. There's a mother-daughter pageant. Jackie is insecure that she never won anything in the pageant world, so she gets her daughter Courtney to join along. This motivation is then dropped, as we focus on Courtney's growing motivation. That is also dropped, and then it's shenanigans with everyone sabotaging each other to win the pageant. Also, Glenn gets into the pageant too. Meanwhile, Chris Griffin pretends to be blind so he can kiss a fat woman. Yeah, that about sums this one up. It's not very good. This episode also guest stars Steve-O, who does jackass things while announcing a pageant. Things like drinking goat's blood and stapling himself. Somehow, him doing it in stop motion doesn't have the same effect as him doing it in live action does. In this episode, the Martins go to Hollywood. That's not very relevant to the episode, though. They stay with a guy that Jackie used to date, who never got over her, 'cause he's a creeper. This culminates in the end, where he gets plastic surgery in order to fool Jackie that he is, in fact, the real Glenn Martin. Because that's who anyone on Earth should want to be. Glenn Martin DDS. I want to buy one of the models that they used to make this show and then just put it in a blender. And then take the clone one and put it in a microwave. Then have the two duke it out until there's nothing but dust left. To be fair, this episode isn't the worst thing in the world. It's inoffensive, if anything. The worst thing to happen is Glenn giving himself liposuction and then reversing it. That's kind of gross, but other than that, this is just a waste of a half hour. There's a subplot where Chris Griffin goes on a game show where he has to prove that he's smarter than a chicken, and fails to do so. It is a very Chris Griffin thing to do, in all honesty. But at this point in the show, I was thinking that I might have to promote Chris Griffin to Connor Martin. Because here's the thing. The stupid, idiot teenage son is one of the most overdone things in these kind of shows. Family Guy is just the template. But one thing I will say that does set Glenn Martin apart from Family Guy is that they're actually doing things with their Chris Griffin. I wouldn't be surprised if Connor Martin got more screen time and plot-relevant things to do in this one season that the actual Chris Griffin has gotten in the past 10 years of Family Guy. So, gold star, and yeah, he has a moment to shine in this episode too. In this episode, Glenn Martin is gonna get political. That sounds terrifying. However, the scariest thing is that this episode happens to be the best one yet. I'm not even kidding. When Glenn goes to Washington, D.C., he gets called in to help fix Barack Obama's teeth, because Obama was knocked down on the basketball court by Hillary Clinton. Here's a fun fact. In the development of this episode, something went horribly wrong. Someone actually went behind the scenes and sabotaged the production of this episode by inserting actually funny jokes. For example, Connor discovers that Dick Cheney has gone insane and is living in an evil lair under the White House. Look, it's not the most original idea, but they have fun with it.
But what could you possibly want from Connor?
I'm grooming him.
Dick Cheney tries to send Connor to the moon in tinfoil, or to Jupiter, or something. There's also a lot of Joe Biden jokes in this episode, like, a lot more than you'd expect. And I mean, It might be because of our current era, but for once, Glenn Martin DDS is actually kind of refreshing because it's giving us jokes involving Joe Biden that's not he's old and senile. It at least feels like something different in 2025, even if the vice president has a useless job was never an original joke. It also helps that a lot of the names in the episode are still relevant and well known. Well, it helps the episode. I'm not so sure that being in political stasis is great for the actual nation. Glenn gets surprise famous for being seen as the most average person in America before controversy happens leading to scandal, which is kind of reminiscent to something that actually happened. Surprisingly though, despite the political theme, this episode knows how to actually have fun. It might not be so great in 100 years that everyone involved is as known as Millard Fillmore, but hey, I'm at this point of time, unfortunately. I will say though, this show has like the worst Obama impression that I've ever heard. Give it a listen.
Thanks for coming. I'd be more eloquent, except I'm in excruciating pain.
Like, that doesn't even sound remotely close to the guy. Like, even for imitator standards. Episode 16, Roller Derby. I'm gonna make this one quick. If you want to watch an animated sitcom episode about anger management, watch the King of the Hill episode about anger management. If you want to watch an animated sitcom episode about roller derby, watch the King of the Hill episode where Peggy joins roller derby. If you want to watch a piece of media that has a point to taking place in Philadelphia and understands more about the city than cheesesteaks, watch National Treasure. If you want to watch an episode about kids secretly feeding people dog food, please get help. This one is gross and not fun. In this episode, Jackie has a midlife crisis upon turning 40, and so she joins one of her favorite 80s bands, the Bang Bangs, which I had to look up to see if they really existed or not. And even though I did look it up, I'm still not entirely sure. This forces Glenn to become a house husband. The jokes are around 4 out of 5 on the overdone scale. The man taking his wife for granted is a tale as old as time in the world of sitcoms. Seriously, watch the Flintstones once in your life before you start writing for a sitcom. But I'll give the show credit. At least Glenn is relatively able to do it. There's like only one joke in the entire episode of men being unable to do domestic stuff. There's also a subplot where Connor has a crisis that he's not as strong as Wendy, and this eventually leads to him developing a masochism fetish. Like every other subplot in the show, it goes nowhere. He asks Wendy to beat him up at the end, she gets grossed out, and that's the end of the plot. I wouldn't call it original, and I wouldn't call it funny. The episode goes through a ton of jokes that you've probably seen in banned episodes, but I will give the episode this. It is spot on with the fun sounds of 80s pop rock, and unfortunately for me, that's something that I really do like. It gives me a softer spot for this episode in general, and I feel less harsh towards the whole thing than I probably should. And, I don't know, the resolution was actually kind of sweet. I'll give this one a pass by the skin of its teeth. Now that I've said that, my quota for dental puns is met. However, Glenn himself would probably murder me for not saying enamel. Well, in this episode, because his father-in-law keeps emasculating him, Glenn buys a super large lobster that puts him in so much debt that he has to become a male stripper in Las Vegas. I feel there are only so many ways to say an episode is not very good, and by this point I've run out of all of them half a season ago. This is also home to probably the worst non-gross-out joke in the entire show. When Glenn orders the biggest lobster, the restaurant and everyone in it goes on and on and on about how beloved that lobster was. I get that it's trying to be ridiculous and the right kind of fucked up, but I don't know, man. The episode just makes you feel really, really bad for this lobster that they're about to eat. If you want to see this done properly, look up the Simpsons episode where Homer has Pinchy the lobster. It ends the same way, but it is far, far funnier. The main plot is probably the second worst the series has had. However, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but this episode actually also has the best thing that's ever been in Glenn Martin DDS. So, randomly at the start of the episode, we're introduced to this international super spy James Bond character, and it's ridiculous and out of nowhere. Like, it literally just hijacks the plot. However, this eventually does get roped into the Martin family. Because of shenanigans, the spy gets handcuffed to Connor, who is responsible for keeping him from smoking for the rest of the episode. And it's just genuinely funny. It's also unique, and Surprise, it's original. It actually fucking works. And for some reason, the Chris Griffin of this whole thing is becoming the one character who is actually doing something engaging and interesting. I can't believe it. Also, Penn and Teller guest star this episode because Las Vegas, I guess, they do literally nothing. Which, at least I have to admit, it's better than them literally playing with bullshit. And you know that the show probably wanted to do that. It is what Glenn Martin wants to do. Look into his beady eyes and you can see, he wanted to see Penn and Teller play with bullshit. Look, I get it. I've said that the show and its plots are cliché so many ways and so many times already. We're not even halfway through, it's already become a cliché in and of itself. And I get it. There's nothing new under the sun. Originality is a myth that you can never achieve ever. All I'm saying is that when the Fairly Odd Parents had an episode where the family moved to a gated community that brainwashed people with edibles, the Fairly Odd Parents didn't have to resort to using male breast milk to try and be funny. Although, to be fair, the Fairly Odd Parents couldn't avoid the temptation to do M-Preg entirely. I wouldn't say that this episode borders on plagiarism, but it feels like I'm watching a longer, grosser, less funny version of that Fairly Odd Parents episode, which aired on the exact same network. And maybe that's because the base Stepford plot is largely interesting and unique. When someone else does it, it's hard to not make comparisons. But in a show that desperately needs originality like Glenn Martin DDS, when they pick a plot that is so clearly used by one of their competitors, they need to do something to stand out, desperately, that's not male breast milk. That's what I'm saying. This one is near the bottom. Every so often when I watch the show, or any bad show really, I have a strange dilemma that I probably shouldn't have. I have to determine if an episode is genuinely good, or it's just good in comparison, because I've been watching too much Glenn Martin DDS. In this episode, a serial killer that Glenn worked on and did a shit job gets released from prison. And honestly, that's not a bad premise. There's not much that you can actually do with a dentist profession in a sitcom, as this show goes on to repeatedly prove again and again and again. But this is one of the two ideas that actually seems to work with this premise. The tension in this episode actually gets very high, and there's a lot of comedic payoff in the episode, as we get into the running gag of Dr. Weekend at Bernie's 2. It's legitimately good, especially for a season finale. The stakes have never been higher throughout this entire show as this ex-con tries to ruin Glenn's life. It does have a couple of gross out bits because this is Glenn Martin DDS, and it wants to be every adult cartoon in history despite its better judgment, but it really is only a brief couple of moments. And it doesn't stop me with actually being okay with seeing this episode again, which, I guess, as far as I can tell, is what defines a good episode in this show. Second best of the season. So, that's every episode of Season 1 of Glenn Martin DDS. The show, believe it or not, was actually renewed for a second season. That might sound baffling or strange, but if you're new to the animation world, it's not that uncommon for a bad, terrible show to get a second season. It's business politics, really. Ever since the late 2000s, networks would order a bunch of episodes and then just split them in half, calling it Season 1 and Season 2. Even though there's really no difference and they were all put together without any notable increase of quality or change-up. I guess networks do this to make a show look better, because it'd be embarrassing to say that a show is so terrible it didn't even make it to Season 2. To be fair, 40 episodes is a lot for a 22-minute cartoon, especially stop motion, so maybe there actually was high demand for Glenn Martin DDS to get a legitimate second season. But before we look at that second season, let's see the stats of Season 1. Here is every episode of Season 1 ranked. Now, if you just skipped to this part for some reason, I called each of the top 4 episodes good to some degree. I'd also throw in the subplot of Vegas Strip in there too, if you want an obligatory top 5. And I want to be clear, when I say that these episodes are good, I am being very generous. Some of them go toe-to-toe with like a quote-unquote good episode of A Simpsons in their mid-20s seasons. Nothing compared to something like Brick Like Me. But Glenn Martin, as fair as I can, does have episodes that did genuinely keep my attention or made me laugh a couple of times, which is all you can really ask for from a sitcom. From 5th place down to, I don't know, 6th place, I'd say that the episodes are rather meh. They're at least watchable. They don't have much of a pulse, but they don't make me want to die. The other 13 episodes range from painfully generic and boring, to borderline plagiarism, to being try-hard offensive, to being some of the most disgusting thing ever put to stop motion. Glenn Martin DDS is far from the worst show that I've ever seen, but in some cases, that's not for lack of trying. Some shows do get better as they go on, although from what I've noticed here, there is no noticeable trend line. Episodes will randomly be okay or abysmal, and where they place has nothing to do with it. Speaking of which, I should also remind you that I am reviewing these episodes in production order, not airing order, because the episodes were aired out of order. And I don't know why, because they clearly did not start with their strongest episodes. Also, the show does have some small level of continuity, which makes things confusing for the casual viewer. I've also neglected to mention that this show actually had a laugh track. You haven't heard it, and neither have I, since the laugh track versions of the episodes are apparently lost media. But the laugh track only lasted a month anyway before it was requested to be removed by the series creators, because, and I quote here, "the show has too much internal thinking." With that being said, let's take a look at Season 2. If you would have asked me what Season 2 of Glenn Martin DDS would have started with, I never would have guessed that it would be a crossover between Howie Mandel and Bret Michaels, the lead singer of Poison. Whoever made Glenn Martin DDS has the weirdest scatterplot of media tastes that I've ever come across. And it's not like they have cameos either like Penn and Teller did. They're integral to the plot, as they host a game show that tries to break up the marriage of Jackie and Glenn. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but this is the perfect premise for a sitcom, and I'm actually surprised a Glenn Martin DDS plot hasn't been done more often. I mean, marriage crisis episodes are a dime a dozen, but starring on a game show that's sole focus is breaking the couple up, that's not a bad premise at all, especially when you're always pairing the idiot with the nag, because it's never believable for them to actually be together. An episode like this goes a long way to proving their believability, and in the end, the episode does make both Jackie and Glenn look a lot better. Due to its nature, the episode does have a lot of those stupidly typical sitcom gags. Glenn doesn't know his wife is allergic to shrimp, but in all fairness, it does have a build-up. And due to the game show, a lot of what he's expected to know is actually unreasonable. I can't say that the episode is all that funny, which is unfortunate as a sitcom stands for situational comedy, but the actual writing is a lot tighter than it has been, and this episode has more of a structure on what it wants to do. The problem is the subplot. For starters, it's another one that the show wants very little to do with. Like, I think it totals 3 minutes of the entire episode where the kids are with Grandpa trying to hunt down a turkey. At least for once it actually does resolve. However, my problem with it is that at one point, dear old Grandpa eats the turkey shit on screen. I have no idea what the temptation of adult cartoons is when they do this. You were doing so well. You were keeping me engaged, you actually had a decent story, but you had to. You fucking had to go gross out for no fucking reason, completely taking the audience out of the experience. The joke isn't the grossest that I've ever seen, but it taints the episode. And it is just so out of place due to the rest of the episode, which was largely restrained in that for once. Even with the turkey shit, I'd have to say that this is still the 4th best episode so far, but that's largely because I am choosing to ignore that one scene, and that is a large caveat. Characters eating shit is just a special kind of gross. Honestly, it's worse than the toenail scene from House Fancy. Even if it doesn't last as long, it's just like, why? Who thought it was funny? All you need to know about this episode is that it's a canine episode, which means that you see way too much of that dog's giant fucking anus. Honestly, I think that at this point, Glenn Martin DDS is severely regretting the idea of including a dog with a giant anus. Canine actually stopped appearing so much, and by the time we get to this episode here, everyone in the episode is saying that he's a shit dog because of his giant shitter. He can't compete in the dog show because of it. And while they show the dog's anus sticking to the window, which was in the first episode, the actual visual of the ass has been removed from it, technically speaking. This episode's main problem is that it wants you to feel sympathy for this dog, which I'm never going to. Canine doesn't have a personality, and his entire existence is, look at the giant ass on this dog. I feel exactly like Glenn in this episode. The new dog is better in every way, and the old dog is useless. It has no personality, and it's just there to be a walking ass joke. There are 2 subplots in this episode. Courtney tries to nix thumb-sucking, and the plot is whatever, I guess. It's alright. Wendy tries to make some cartoon expressions, which she can't do because it's stop motion. But there's also some jokes about how Ellen DeGenerate, sorry, I keep making that mistakes, Ellen DeGeneres, is addicted to dancing. I don't know if that's funny in 2025, but it's, memorable at least. The other subplot is Connor acting like a dog. Beyond wanting you to feel sympathy for Canine, this episode is just forgettable, which is weird because it involves cloned dogs, and is extremely wacky and has this insane premise, but I can't buy into it because the show chose this terrible, terrible concept for a pet. Top 10 worst family pets in cartoon history. Number 10, Canine the dog. Number 9, Canine the dog. Number 8, Canine the dog. Number 7, Sparky from Fairly Odd Parents. Every other number, Canine the dog. I don't care that Canine gets cloned because I fucking hate Canine. And Canine was the biggest mistake that this show ever made in conception. Removing Canine alone would bump the show up from a bad 3 out of 10 to a very, very, very middle-of-the-road, completely forgettable 5 out of 10. Whether or not that's actually an improvement is up to you. I have to admit, the show is, trying in Season 2. This episode features a cyborg and Willie Nelson, and it gets crazy and chaotic, and by the end, the entire gates of hell open up. But underneath all the zaniness, we have 2 main plots. There's a subplot of Connor learning to relate to girls by learning how to dance. But because Footloose, dancing is forbidden in Texas. I've never seen Footloose, but whoever wrote this did, and thinks that just referencing the movie alone is funny. And it's, not. The other jokes in the episode are along the lines of this.
I wish there was something a 13-year-old boy could do in the privacy of his own room to get some physical release.
And I gotta say, at this point, Connor Martin is really risking demotion back to Chris Griffin. In Season 2, his antics have been reeled in, and he's just not as fun or funny as he used to be. Oh my god, Glenn Martin DDS is actually suffering from seasonal rot in some way. That fucking breaks my brain. The main plot is that Wendy wants to feel like part of the family. Again. And so she joins football, and that makes Glenn like her a lot. But she risks injury, and it all feels like a really meh episode of King of the Hill. And I mean, not just because it takes place in Texas, and they got one of the same voice actors from King of the Hill. I mean, it feels like a mediocre episode of King of the Hill, because it more or less is. I didn't really expect Glenn Martin DDS of all things to get out 2 Halloween episodes. Honestly, it's the smaller things about the show that tend to surprise me more than the bigger things. Okay, I guess this episode isn't technically a Halloween episode. It's not set on any particular day, but it takes place in Salem, Massachusetts. And it's about witches, and we get to see Stephen King get beat up by a skeleton, so it counts as a Halloween episode in my book. Honestly though, this episode feels like it's both on autopilot and has one of the most unfocused plots in history. So it starts with the Martins going from graveyard to see their ancestors. From there, they believe that the Martin women didn't do anything in the past. So Jackie goes to a genealogy place. Like they don't know what they were looking at the start of the episode. From that, they learn that one of her ancestors was a witch. And they're in Salem. The whole town goes crazy for them, with jokes that don't really pan out. It's along the lines of, we're sorry we were so offensive, now we're gonna go in the opposite direction and do a bunch of things for you, while still completely misunderstanding what being an actual real-life witch or Wiccan actually is. And yes, they do use the word Wiccan at some point. I think it should be stated that witches and Wiccans are not synonyms. Not that I expect Dentist Brain to understand that. Anyway, after Jackie gets famous for having a witch ancestor, they end up exploring their ancestor's old mansion, and they discover that she was actually a prostitute. And then there's a cover-up that backfires and everyone wants to burn Jackie because she's not a witch, until the actual ancestor appears who actually is a witch, and makes it look like Jackie has actual powers, which apparently she should because her ancestor really was a witch. And with all of this going on, Glenn and Connor wash up on a beach and are talking to a bowling ball and meet the not as important Kennedys. This whole episode is just a mess. It's one plot point to the next without any regard for anything else that's happening. And I mean, I know the show can do worse, but I can't call this a good episode. I mean, it held my attention sort of, but it is just so unfocused. Like they had simultaneously too many ideas and too few ideas. I don't know, it's better than the pilot, I guess, and it's better than the last episode for damn sure. I'm just getting worried that season 2 is going to be all bad episodes. So, funny story, I try to watch 5 episodes of Glenn Martin every day while doing this project. That's about 2 hours of The Dentist, which I think is enough exposure to Glenn Martin for anyone. It's dangerously close to a lethal overdose and highly discouraged by the ADA. Every so often, though, I came across one episode that was just so abhorrent that I had to stop for the day and maybe take an entire vacation from everything. And like this episode in particular, it shouldn't be that bad. And for the most part, it's not. Connor gets bullied, and so Glenn needs to teach him to defend himself, which, you know, is a fairly typical stock sitcom plot. Things even get interesting where, during an acupuncture accident, Glenn is no longer able to feel pain, and this leads to the two of them being superheroes. It was actually kind of fun for a bit, even if it doesn't hold a candle to the Pie Man. Unfortunately, this is an episode that wants to be in the house fancy genre. It's an episode that would actually be fine. It would actually be enjoyable. Except it couldn't fucking help itself. It needed to have one of the worst jokes possible to ruin everything because Glenn Martin DDS has no fucking self-control. You've heard of the toenail scene. This show wanted to dethrone the king. Introducing the hangnail scene, where because Glenn isn't able to feel pain, he rips off his own fucking flesh. Even though it's stop motion, it actually looks surprisingly brutal. And while the ripping is shorter than the house fancy toenail, the actual damage is on screen longer. And after that, I couldn't enjoy a damn thing about this episode and everything else was soured. It's far worse than the shit-eating joke, even though this episode also had one of those. Worst episode of season 2 so far, by far, and pretty damn low on the list of all of the episodes.
Mr. Trump, what makes you succeed at everything you touch?
Well, this is the episode that you've all been waiting for. This episode is really weird because it's easy to forget that Donald Trump had something of a reputation at one point among the general public. Not exactly as an upstanding individual, like even this episode makes jokes about him being a douche. But there's a lot of jokes in this episode that sound like they come straight out of the new norm. For example, while wearing Donald Trump's wig, everything someone touches turns to literal gold. This episode kind of just breaks my brain because it comes from an entirely different world. Is it funny? I don't know. It's definitely a spectacle, I can say that much. The family goes to New York, New York. Connor and Jackie do something about fashion. That turns into a vampire story, and I guess that's okay. At the very least, it's not gross or anything. They just don't do very much with the whole vampire concept, believe it or not. Hey Arnold did more with vampires in a world that doesn't have vampires in 11 minutes. Becoming a vampire is just the consequences of Connor not taking out the trash. So, one thing that I haven't mentioned up to this point is that Courtney is actually right-wing, and I haven't mentioned it at all because it's rarely relevant and only comes up like once every 5 episodes, where she'll call climate change a myth in the pilot, for example. So she and Wendy really look up to Donald Trump. 2010 Donald Trump specifically. It leads to a lot of jokes and moments that have, aged one way or another. Depending on which side of the political aisle that you're on, you might like these. Or you might not. I'm just sitting here baffled because it's an alien portrayal of Donald Trump and, you know, like a sitcom that wasn't produced by Elon Musk or Kid Rock or whatever. So, the girls steal Trump's wig, and they learn that the wig turns the wearer evil. So, bald Donald Trump is going around doing insanely nice things, even though he kinda looks like Jeff Bezos without the wig. However, on the flip side, Courtney and Wendy don't do any evil things themselves, which is just another bit of missed potential. The girls cackle a bit, but they don't actually do anything. Also, the hairpiece is alive, which is another Simpsons did it thing. Look, I'm sorry, I have no idea what to call this one. Beyond, weird. Which, considering this is Glenn Martin DDS, it's probably an improvement over the series average. At the very least, there's no fucking hangnail scene in this episode, which is a win in my book. I'll call it the second best episode of season 2 so far. Let's go with that. Like, whatever you think about the jokes or the politics or whatever, at the very least, this episode is memorable. And I'm going to take my victories where I can get them. So, Glenn Martin DDS tends to have two different modes, bland and boring, and outright terrible. Luckily, in the viewing department, this one is in the former. Betty White guest stars again as Glenn's mother, and this time she's getting married. And very fortunately, this sequel episode is nowhere near as bad as its predecessor. If you don't remember, that episode had one singular joke. What if old people sex? This one doesn't have that problem. That's because this one doesn't have jokes. Okay, that's inaccurate if you want to get technical. The episode does more gay jokes with Glenn. And yes, I know. This show came out in a different time when that stuff was more common. They still do a lot of gay jokes with Glenn for no reason. Connor feeds the doves some rice, and the doves explode at the end. I guess that's a joke. Also, Glenn falls into a literal bottomless bowl of salad. I know this is a little bit scattershot, but I'm actually having a hard time remembering what happened during this episode. Not as I record the audio for this video weeks later, but like writing the entry in the script minutes after I watched the episode. The plot is this. Glenn gets a new stepbrother, and they compete over Glenn's mother's affections. This new stepbrother is rich, this leads to conflict, I guess, and that gets resolved in the end, out of nowhere because, no one has any chemistry. And I mean it, no one has any chemistry or any real reason for what they're doing in this episode. Courtney gives Connor the job back after he fed the doves rice and made them bowling balls. All for no reason. And the resolution of the episode is basically that 5 different times. MC Hammer also guest stars in this particular episode because I'll give him this. When Hammer had an appearance in Family Guy, they only licensed his song and had him make an appearance. MC Hammer actually voice acts in this episode. I kinda wish they gave him more to do. He has 2 lines in the entire episode, and maybe would actually make this episode some form of interesting. Look, I am sorry, there's just nothing interesting to say about this episode. It is entirely in a dead zone. This episode's a little bit better than the last few. Glenn Martin pulls his 10,000th tooth, and upon doing so, he has an identity crisis. He finally realizes that no one on Earth actually wants to watch a show about a dentist. So when he meets his old mob friend, the government offers to let him swap lives and form a new identity, where he becomes an elevator music record producer. This episode is largely harmless. It's completely watchable, but it does feel very unfocused. This episode once again tries to give something for every single character to do. Wendy is now Courtney's big sister and gets to be the favorite child. Connor tosses fish for some reason. But like these other overstuffed episodes, it just never really seems to commit to any one idea. It's just one plot beats the next for each of the subplots, except Connor's, which is just kind of a pointless waste of time. In a show that I care about, it would be nice to see all the cameos that make an appearance in this episode. We get pretty much everyone from season 1. However, this is not a show that I care about. I don't know, I'd give this one a 5 out of 10, maybe a 6 out of 10 if I'm feeling very generous. Unfortunately for the video, it's another one where I don't have much to say. It didn't make me laugh a single time, but at least it managed to keep my attention, which is certainly an improvement from some of the stuff that I've had to deal with out of this show. So somehow the show not only managed to pull off 2 Halloween episodes, but 2 Christmas episodes as well. It took Simpsons until season 5 to get that. And you know what? This one actually is an improvement over the first one, because this episode actually remembers that it's a Christmas special all the way through. Like Treehouse of Horror, it's a compilation of 3 non-canon shorts roughly about the season. In the first one, Glenn turns into a reindeer. In the second one, Glenn turns into a snowman. In the third one, Glenn turns into a pile of literal shit. Actually, no, it's a parody of Rankin Bass, with Connor being Santa Claus. The first 2 shorts made me think that the point of this endeavor was to make Glenn look as unsightly as possible. His snowman and his reindeer designs are rather hideous. Luckily, full reindeer is only like a minute at most. There really is some bad gore and piss jokes in this episode all throughout. Glenn's antlers tear out an eyeball, but I will say it is restrained compared to how it could be. Thank God. There's just about one gross out gag per short. The snowman one is a parody of a not very good movie with a horrifying design, and is also not very good. So let's not talk about it. The first segment starts out to be a parody of The Fly with Jeff Goldblum.
Oh, it seems you're standing under the mistletoe. Well, rules are rules.
There were a couple of good moments in it, but the highlight of the entire episode really is Billy Idol's guest spot. He has a holiday song parody, and it's just the best part of the entire season so far. I can't play it for copyright reasons, it really is Billy Idol's work, but if it does get to be Christmas again, try looking up the clip. The final short is interesting. For a stop-motion show, parodying Rankin Bass stuff feels obligatory. But I feel if the show wasn't stop-motion, going stop-motion to parody the Rankin Bass would have felt all the stronger. You know what I mean? It feels too obvious. That's not to say that it's bad, although it has bad things in it. Connor has to go through toilets to deliver toothbrushes, which is, but it's not like the short is offensive or anything. I promise you, I am trying to stay as engaged as possible, but we're almost 30 episodes in to the most blah show in history. And I suppose on some level, Glenn Martin DDS is also trying. And the first season, it was desperately trying to shock, and doing so in so many different ways. The second season, it feels like the show realized that doing that was a bad idea to an extent, and instead it's flailing around to try and find some sort of identity that it just doesn't have. We have stories about vampires, witches, Donald Trump's evil wig. The first season did have the Halloween episode that had a cameo appearance of a werewolf, but other than that, it feels like season 2 is stuffing in a bunch of shit that doesn't belong in a show about a dentist traveling around the US in an RV. Look, I'm sorry, you picked the premise for some fucking reason, and you liked the premise so much, you funded it yourself. You saw something in this premise, so I expect you to stick to that premise. As for this episode specifically, it's fine. It's probably the second best of the second season so far, and I'm never gonna watch it again. That should tell you where we stand. This time around, we've got a Courtney episode. In it, one of her stock purchases backfires, and she has a brain aneurysm. Seriously, what the fuck is that expression? I say it again. The one unique thing about this show, it being stop motion, is the worst thing about it. Expressions like this would work so much better in traditional 2D cell-based animation. Or hell, even CGI. This is the worst animation medium to do these big, wacky expressions with. At least on an episodic television budget. You need big Hollywood bucks to make this work. Anyway, whatever's going on in Courtney's brain is such a shock to the system that it makes this little girl act like, gasp, a little girl. What a concept for an episode. Honestly, at the time that this was written, Courtney's new personality is actually a lot less cliche than her old personality. Eventually, she buys a pony and fails on that, and so it accidentally gets sold to the glue factory. Trying to be generous, it's not the worst idea for a premise, and I know this for a fact, because American Dad did something similar, and that episode is a lot better than this one. I know, it's another cheap shot comparing this show to shows that have had hundreds of episodes. But it's every fucking episode of this show! Every single episode is derivative in some way or another! The only thing that it's not derivative in is how terrible it can be occasionally. And even the worst other animated sitcoms do not have this show's problem. No matter what else I'm reviewing, I couldn't make so many easy comparisons and say Border Town, Legend of Chamberlain Heights, almost any other sitcom that I've reviewed. And for how much South Park coined Simpsons did it, they've got dozens, if not hundreds of episodes that are uniquely South Park, even if a joke or a plotline superficially resembles something else. This episode also has a subplot where Connor cuts doll hair that goes nowhere. because there's also a running gag on top of that where every time he gets hit in the head, he becomes a super genius. In terms of personality swaps, I have the same opinion here as I did with Courtney. If the entire show had Courtney being pony-loving and Connor being a super genius, the entire show would actually be better, because it is something that stands out from the crowd. I called Connor Chris Griffin for all of Season 1 because it is the most overdone character type you could do with a teenage boy in an animated sitcom. Just make him a hormonal idiot. There's nothing unique or interesting about that. And he only got interesting because they put him in these weird, outlandish scenarios. This episode also has a third subplot, where Glenn plays with a doll for the entirety of the episode. It's not very good, and all of these episodes are starting to feel like mush. Like, this is supposed to be a tier list, and you might have noticed that I've stopped making individual rankings as we go on. In Season 1, I could clearly define where in the whole lineup an episode should be, from best to worst, clearly with maybe some overlap. I can't do that with Season 2, because there's two categories. The incredibly blah and mediocre that I am never going to think of again, and the incredibly blah and mediocre with that one horrendous joke that will be forever burned into my psyche for the rest of my life. And this one is in the former. At least it's more interesting than Life Swap, I guess. Baseball, 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 baseball. Connor, baseball, 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 baseball. North Korean baby arm joke is back. Baseball, 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 baseball. Highlight of the episode, really. Baseball, 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 baseball. Baseball, 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 baseball. Baseball, 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 baseball. Baseball, 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 baseball. Baseball, baseball, baseball. Baseball, 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 baseball. Baseball. Courtney meets her old assistant who is successful for making slushies out of garbage. This plotline has no end. Baseball, 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 baseball. The old assistant is never caught, and the resolution is her telling her father that the entire team is trying to take the fall on baseball, 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 baseball. There is no jokes in this episode, there is just baseball. Baseball, 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 baseball. Me saying baseball 200 times is the equivalent of this episode, so I will keep saying baseball until the baseball is the baseball, baseball, baseball. Baseball, 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 baseball. So, fun fact, this episode actually doesn't have a script on the episode list on Wikipedia, so I can only assume that I am the first person who has ever seen this episode. But I'll spoil the mystery for you right now. The plot of this episode is that everyone is a dick and I hate everything. There are three main plots, with everyone deciding to be volunteers for I don't give a shit. Connor volunteers Canine to be a therapy dog, but the blind woman thinks that Connor is the dog, and he acts like one for the rest of the episode. If you haven't noticed, Glenn Martin DDS has stopped being derivative of other shows, and has decided to become derivative of itself. Within 40 episodes, this is really inexcusable. At first, Canine looks jealous, but then he completely drops out of the episode. I guess I shouldn't complain so much about subplots going nowhere, because as we've all learned from the animated sitcom law of 2005, every single animated sitcom episode needs to have a subplot, even if it overboards the episode. It's completely arbitrary and obligatory. Who cares if it's not funny, has no point, and just wastes time. Speaking of being not funny, having no point, and wasting time, Courtney and Wendy also volunteer at the hospital. They awake a coma patient who sings a song about the joys of volunteering, and acts like Mary Poppins. But then it's revealed that she's actually a janitor and falls out the window. The main meat and potatoes of this episode is everyone is a sexist idiot. Glenn joins the volunteer firefighters, which is said to be men's work. He fails at it because Glenn Martin, but they see Jackie delivering pre-Grubhub version of Grubhub. They appreciate her and bring her aboard, but then out of nowhere it's revealed that they're also sexists and have been secretly taking high-pose photographs for a calendar. Also, Glenn joins a conspiracy rebel prepper group, which should be a lot more interesting than it actually is. Like, this is probably what the episode should be about, and not an unfocused twist at the end of it all. I don't like anyone in this episode, and the whole thing feels like a waste of time. They don't make the hospital a particularly interesting setting, and a good chunk of the episode takes place there. You know, at this point, you're probably tired of hearing me say it's not funny over and over and over again, and you gotta be thinking, humor is subjective, right? Maybe it's just my own personal taste. So, for the last leg of the show, I'll cut you a deal. I will state the highlight joke of the entire episode to see if you think it's funny and I'm not just delusional. So when the conspiracy guys think that Glenn is a lizard person, they tie him up in a grain silo. The grain silo catches fire and the corn kernels inside start to pop. To survive, Glenn tries to eat the popcorn, but at some point he can't keep eating anymore.
Oh, can't eat anymore. Without butter and soda.
And then the whole thing blows up exactly like stovetop popcorn. Wasn't that hilarious? It had better be, because it's one of the funniest jokes of the entire show. This episode is just so fucking boring too. Third worst of the season, no contest. So it's time for the first and only two-parter of Glenn Martin DDS. I have literally no idea why this was a two-parter. Beyond the episode just being the Martins going to a summer camp, the plot here is entirely self-contained. No to be continued, nothing. Beginning, middle, and end. If I could just rant for a minute, I have no idea what the fuck we're even doing here. The plot of Glenn Martin DDS is that a dentist burns down his house and travels around the United States, seeing famous locales. That was what season 1 was about, that is what the show is promised to be. And being as fair as I can, the show did take advantage of that premise in season 1. They went to Vegas, Washington DC, Amish country, Florida, blah 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 blah. There were sites and locations and actual monuments that the show did try to take advantage of. And on some level, it did give the show a unique flavor, or it would have if Ben 10 didn't exist. For some reason, they stopped doing that entirely in season 2. Like, the last episode took place in Tennessee, but it really could have taken place anywhere. The baseball episode took place in Texas, but it could have taken place anywhere. The closest that we've had in season 2 to capturing the travel around the US vibe that's baked into the show's premise is the Tooth Fairy episode. This episode, specifically, could have taken place in any show. Connor has to go to summer camp and tries to fit in with the other boys there. Isn't this like the summer camp plotline? Like, it's the first idea anyone would think of when they think of summer camp. Thankfully, this episode is elevated by its subplots. Courtney and Wendy compete over the affections of a dead guy, which is, I don't know, a little funny. Glenn becomes the camp counselor and convinces another guy to dress up as a serial killer. This chainsaw guy is probably the highlight of this episode, as he suddenly realizes that he wasted his life being a camp counselor. It's actually, dare I say it, funny for once. And here's the really sad part. Considering that I can find something in this episode funny at all, even if it's like only one small running gag, it makes it the second best episode of season 2 this far, and like the 5th best episode of the entire show. Also, Jackie runs the talent show to escape from mosquitoes because only talent show staff are allowed to be inside the auditorium. She later goes outside without any problem because proofreading is for tools. Also, Glenn was too busy starring in the show to take the job. I got a question for you guys. Why the fuck is Jimmy Kimmel in Glenn Martin DDS?
Okay, Martin, I'll give you a race. And when I get a hold of your watermelon-sized head, I'm gonna...
Why are any of these people in Glenn Martin DDS? What kind of dirt does Michael Eisner have on these people? LeBron has a cameo. Jimmy Kimmel has a full-on guest spot. So apparently, Jimmy Kimmel went to summer camp when he was a kid with Glenn Martin DDS and managed to prank Glenn so very hard. And so, they're gonna have a rematch 10-mile race in this episode. Let's start with the good here. This episode actually has a funny joke. Like, a genuinely funny joke.
Man, it's up to us to save America's favorite late-night host. All right, one of America's favorite late-night hosts. All right, Jimmy Kimmel.
Kimmel's an easy target, but he's an easy target for a reason. On the flip side, the Martins do save Jimmy Kimmel in the end, and that's something that I can't abide by. But in all seriousness, once again, that one joke there makes it like the best episode of season 2. When it comes to the actual plots, there's really not much to comment on. Wendy gets to try out to be a leader. Connor is there. Jackie is there. This crazy counselor has a crush on Jimmy Kimmel and tries to kill him with a cannonball. Honestly, the show can get kinda good when there's crazy murderers, and the show should do that a lot more, because I want all of these characters to die. 4th best episode of the series. Also, I am happy to report that K9 has presumably starved to death because he's not in this episode at all. I will give the show credit in this one little thing. At the very least, Glenn Martin didn't forget the anniversary. That is probably the biggest sitcom cliche in history. God have mercy on anyone who decides to use that thinking it's original or interesting or new. Episode 35, Glenn Hog Day. So season 2 also has an anniversary episode like season 1 did. I'm guessing if the show went on, it'd have a Halloween, Christmas, and an anniversary episode every single season. And you'll never guess what they do in this episode. Take a guess. You'll never get it. You'll never get what they do for Glenn Martin, the most cliched dumbass dad in the most cliched sitcom imaginable. Can you believe it? He forgot his wedding anniversary! Oh my god, why the fuck is this plot still a thing? If there is one sitcom plot that is so overdone that it should never be done again, can we all agree that it's the husband forgets his wedding anniversary? Like, the only thing more shocking than a show thinking that it could pull off this plot and make it new or interesting is the fact that somehow Glenn Martin, DDS, actually managed to fucking pull it off. I'm not even kidding. This is one of the best episodes of the show. And how? By basically taking the plot from an Adam Sandler movie. So, in this episode, Glenn forgets the anniversary. Hurdy-durdy-dur. That's our father. He's an idiot. But then he gets injured, and his injury stops him from making new memories. So every single day, he believes that it's his anniversary, and Jackie is not going to convince him otherwise until he gets it right. They actually make it very interesting, and they do a lot of interesting things with the comedy. It's actually quite a bit different from what you normally get. Like, for one thing, sitcoms don't usually put the wife in the wrong for this plot, but as the episode goes on, everyone is clearly against Jackie, which, if nothing else, is a new way of doing this kind of episode. There's also an actually hilarious subplot, where this is the day that Glenn also planned to give his kids the talk. And as they destroy his methods of demonstrating it, Glenn's lessons get more and more deranged. Like, it jumps from him accidentally showing them porn to using their childhood toys to demonstrate. The ways that Glenn continually fails to make a good anniversary are also at least amusing, but the crowning jewel of the episode is when they finally re-jog Glenn's memory. He gets hit by a sledgehammer, and I could watch that all day. If there is any episode of the show that I would come back to, it's this one. And if you want to give Glenn Martin DDS a chance for some reason, this episode is the best chance that you could possibly give it. It is the best episode of the show. And we're back to the status quo. I don't hate this episode, but it's just once again not very interesting. There's a subplot where Connor finds a family of Bigfoot and nearly gets dissected by them, and I wish that's what the episode was about. Instead, it's about Glenn getting rid of a broken old chair and trying to get over his attachment by joining a biker gang. It's really nonsensical and the pieces don't entirely connect. Meanwhile, the kids are doing school stuff because the show decided homeschool was far too boring. There's just not much here. The funniest joke, I guess, was Courtney learning how to dance and getting eaten by a vacuum cleaner. That was mildly amusing. And the best moment, I guess, is Glenn realizing that he does care about Courtney in the end, which made me feel something. I don't know why, because I don't give a dick about either of these characters. This is just another one you could throw in the med department. Episode 37, Windfall. Okay, this episode is just nonsense. Like, literal, actual, active nonsense. If you don't believe me, I'll lay down the plot for you. Glenn can't do his taxes, so he asks his father-in-law to help. His father-in-law berates Glenn's financial situation, which, wait, can you really do this plot in this show when Glenn's a medical professional? He's a dentist. Whatever, I digress. Glenn invests in something, which turns out to be an oil derrick that has no oil. But the plot of land does turn out to have wind. And wind becomes the stand-in for oil and is treated exactly like oil, because I guess switching one thing for another thing is how comedy works in someone's head. And the rest of the episode is just nothing. The two go to business together, Glenn's father-in-law betrays him, there's a tornado, Glenn saves his life. This episode isn't even trying, and I'm not even going to try to find one good moment in it. The plot is so half-assed, I'm going to call it the second worst of the season. Guys, video game is two separate words. Whatever. So in this episode, Jackie gets addicted to an 80s arcade game roughly based on Donkey Kong. It definitely sounds unoriginal how many times I'm saying the show doesn't really have original premises, but you've probably seen at least one Nickelodeon episode with this exact plot. Most likely the iCarly episode where Spencer gets addicted to Pack Rat. And yet, somehow, against all odds, when this show picks the most cliched premises possible, it somehow makes them work. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Video Game Wizard is another good episode. The plot's not much to work with. Jackie is having a hard time homeschooling everyone and having time for herself. So the family hires a tutor. This gives Jackie enough time for painting classes, but instead she comes across an old arcade game that she used to skip geometry classes to play. Meanwhile, the girls hypnotize Connor to act like a robot butler. The plot isn't much to sneeze at, but what really manages to make this episode work is the humor. Like, there's this line here that's absolutely hilarious.
But how did you do all that so fast?
I find you can get so much done when you don't waste time complaining.
And of course, the tutor's breakdown at the end is amazing. They also put a baby doll in the microwave. Also, the local video game champion that Jackie has to beat would have absolutely gotten this show sued if people actually watched it. There's also the scene where Jackie is detoxing from video games, which is one of the few times that the show is actually visually interesting. Second best of the season, third best of the show. In this episode, a secret agent is trying to stop evil mimes from stealing all of America's landmarks. Unfortunately, he's put on suspension by Obama, because the spy doesn't have any attachments to any actual people. Through this, he learns that his old spy partner faked her death, and the spy actually has a daughter. The spy then tries to use this daughter to help get his job back, showing Obama that he actually does have a family. Of course, this plan backfires when the criminals are able to kidnap the daughter, but that's neither here nor there because this is never actually addressed, ever. And the entire point of the spy character was that he was specifically bred to not have any attachments. You might be wondering, what the hell does any of this have to do with a show about a dentist traveling around the United States because he burned his house down? And you know what? That's a good question. I'm wondering that too. The secret agent was in a subplot in the first season once, and to be fair, he was the best part of that episode. Here it's just, what the fuck are we even doing? Personally, I would rather be watching a show about a super spy family, absolutely. 100%. And I get that whoever's working on this show would also rather be making a show about a super spy family, but that's not what Glenn Martin DDS is. This is the show that Michael Eisner spent his rich person money on and got Elijah Wood to guest star in. This is the show that gets to exist because we are clearly in the worst timeline. Look, as bad as the show is, it's only 40 episodes. I expect you to stick with it without going Crash Nebula on me. To be fair, the Martin family is in the episode, for like 2 minutes. The family gets pink eye, so Jackie locks them in a room so she can get to the Kennedy Center without getting sick. She wins in the end, and it feels like this is supposed to be a cliffhanger for a part 2, but it's not. The next episode has nothing to do with this one. The only intersection these two plots have is the spy sees Connor has pink eye and tells his family to run. That's the end of the episode. If you want to watch spy stuff on Nickelodeon, you're better off watching Tough Puppy. And if you want to watch a good adult cartoon about super spies, watch Archer. There's not much action, there's not much comedy, and the best part of the super spy in the original episode was that he had to bounce off Connor, who was trying to stop him from smoking, no matter how much their lives were in danger. Here it's just regular old spy stuff. Being different enough at least means the episode is engaging, so I can't call it totally mediocre. But for an episode that goes completely off the rails like this, it should stand out way more than it actually does. I'd put it above the Christmas episode, I guess. It's just, it doesn't belong here. Episode 40, Heist. I don't give a shit about this episode. You don't give a shit about this episode. Glenn was apparently in the army. The Sarge dies. They have a heist. I don't give a fuck. Connor and Jackie eat literal shit. I don't care. There's throw up. I don't care. I want to be done with this. Glenn almost dies. I don't give a shit. Courtney and Wendy pretend to be psychic and get cursed, and I don't care. Whatever this episode is, it's better than the Vegas episode, worse than the pilot. This never-ending road trip from hell is fucking over. And that is all 40 episodes of Glenn Martin DDS reviewed, which is about 37 more than anyone should ever see. So, what are my final thoughts on this whole endeavor? What do I think about Glenn Martin DDS as a show? I never want to see this guy's Easter Island-shaped head for as long as I live. And that's even before I mentioned the Twitter account that used to advertise the show, which, like, made jokes about disasters. Look it up if you get the chance. At some point as we went along, I did, like, stop talking about an ongoing ranking. So, if you're curious, here's how I'd rank every single episode of Glenn Martin DDS. The first 4 episodes on that list are, like, the only ones that I think are worth watching a second time. Yeah, Night of the Living Dentist was a watchable episode, but I'm never gonna have the urge to want to see that one again, as long as I live. Bust 'em Up was also almost a worthwhile episode, but I don't know if it's just me, but that shit-eating joke really did pull it down. It's lucky it got that high up. That episode down to like Roller Derby are all some variation of meh. They bounce around between like a 5 out of 10 at the high end and a 3 out of 10 at the lower end. Windfall and Below are just terrible. Like, terrible. Either brokenly written, or have the worst jokes, or just flat out disgusting. Yes, the episode where Connor keeps getting stuck in an elephant's ass is the worst episode. Big surprise there. I think that I kept calling this show a 3 out of 10, and I think that's a good place to put my final stamp of a ranking on the show overall. 1.5 stars total out of 5. Making Glenn Martin DDS was a mistake. It's not like it's the worst cartoon that I've ever seen, obviously. It's my job to review bad animation. I have seen worse. But when you talk about worse shows, there's kind of a bit of a paradox. For seeing real, I've had to see every episode of quite a few bad shows. Far worse shows than this. Like Problem Solvers or the Dexter's Lab Revival. Problem Solvers is a far worse show than Glenn Martin DDS. But I actually had a better time watching through it, if that makes sense. Glenn Martin isn't offensive, usually. It's offensively boring. It's a show that seems genuinely confused and passionless. The Problem Solvers is the worst show that I have ever seen, bar none. However, I can imagine a reason why someone would create that show. I have no reason why anyone ever put Glenn Martin DDS to screen. Yes, there's a backstory, and I'm sure Michael Eisner has said something about what inspired him. I have no idea why he decided to create this. Glenn Martin isn't just bland. It's not just Glenn Martin's bland, cliched premise, where literally the only thing it does different is the worst thing about it, the dog with the engorged anus. The show quickly runs out of steam, and much of the show's run is just sterile. The few hidden gems in here seem like genuine accidents that do not belong with the rest of the series. I could see why someone would have made High Guardian Spice, Neo Yokio, or even The Nut Shack. I can even see why someone would like those shows, like genuinely, not ironically. I can't say the same here. I have no idea why anyone on Earth would ever waste their time watching Glenn Martin DDS. Under the hood, it's a bog-standard animated sitcom, which is a genre that's been done to death. Whatever you see here, there are 30, 40, 100 shows that do this so much better. The only thing it has is that it happens to be stop motion. Which, let's be honest, it's not good stop motion, and it being stop motion is not unique enough to salvage anything. And when this video is done, I am never gonna think about Glenn Martin DDS ever again, other than the nightmares. So, the obvious question that must be asked is, do I regret doing this? Do I regret watching every single episode of Glenn Martin DDS? Well, obviously not. You guys helped me fix my teeth, which were broken for like a decade, and that's why I was doing this. And I could obviously make a joke about how no amount of money is ever worth watching Glenn Martin DDS. You guys all pulled together like $1,100 between direct PayPal donations and super chats for the specific dentist streams. If I get paid that kind of money, I'll watch almost any cartoon you want me to. My only real regret during this whole thing is this taking so long to do, and that I genuinely apologize. This was supposed to be done like half a year ago, but life got in the way. This video is long enough as is, so I'll spare you the details for now, but even in the background of this video, I'm still doing other things that are keeping me very occupied. If you've been following me on Twitter, I think the reason should be clear. I just hope the people who were excited about this video aren't too perturbed it took so long. As we close out here, I'll put the specific names of the donators up on screen before we get to the Patreon donators. I'll see you guys all next time, and until next time, you have my eternal gratitude. I don't say this often enough, but my life really would be nothing without your help.